Hello, this is Power in the Word, and I'm Scott Reed. Thanks for joining me for another lesson in our Doctrine and Covenants Come Follow Me as we conclude our year with a short message about Christmas. I want to first thank you for watching, for your love and support this year as we've looked at the Doctrine and Covenants together, and I hope and pray that it has been helpful in your studies. And I'm going to end this year exactly where we began. You might recall that as we introduced the Doctrine and Covenants, that it fulfilled a revelatory pattern of introducing prophet in the very first chapter. You might remember that the very first chapter in the Old Testament is Moses chapter 1, and the very one we will begin with next year. Then came New Testament and its four Gospels, with John chapter 1 being the first chapter and the introduction to a prophet named John the Baptist. We then have looked at the Book of Mormon in its first chapter, where we have a prophet by the name of Lehi being called. And last of all, this year, as we looked into section 1, a section that was not given first, but that the Lord placed at the beginning of its book as a prologue, and a book that in section 1 mentions prophets and apostles approximately 30 different times in its 39 verses, with the 17th verse being the most important. Note that it reads, "Wherefore I, the Lord, knowing the calamity which should come upon the inhabitants of the earth, call upon my servant Joseph Smith Jr., and spake unto him from heaven, and gave him commandments." Well, many of those commandments and insights and doctrines and principles we've discussed over the year. But the Lord claimed that he knew what was coming to us, the calamities, the trials and tribulations, many of which have occurred since this revelation was given. And we note that the Lord has said, those of all past dispensations were required to accept the testimony of the prophet called of God to lead them. Thus their faith was to be centered in the words of a living prophet rather than those of a dead one. In all generations, the faith of the true saints has been a living one, which manifests itself in the saints' acceptance of the revelations of heaven as they are given for their own time and circumstances. Well, we've ended the prophet Joseph Smith's life as we concluded our dispensation leader being martyred in section 135 and his successors. And we now, years later, have seen a succession of the presidency until this time, where we have been given now a prophet, seer, and revelator in President Dallin H. Oaks. Note the Lord has said, the most important prophet, so far as we are concerned, is the one who is living in our day and age. This is the prophet who has today's instruction for God to us. God's revelation to Adam did not instruct Noah how to build the ark. Every generation has need of the ancient scriptures, plus the current scripture from the living prophet. Therefore, the most critical reading and pondering that you should do is of the latest inspired words from the Lord's mouthpiece. That is why it is essential that you have access to and carefully read his words. Let me ask, do we need a true prophet of the Lord on the earth today? Did the people in Noah's day need a prophet to warn them spiritually and temporally? Had a man refused to follow Noah, would he have been saved from the flood? Yet the Bible tells us that in the last days in which we live, the wickedness of the people will become comparable to the wickedness of the people in Noah's day, when God cleansed the earth by flood. Do you think we need a prophet today to warn us and prepare us for the cleansing that God promised will come, this time by fire? If we want to know how well we stand with the Lord, then let us ask ourselves how well we stand with his mortal captain. How close do our lives harmonize with the Lord's anointed, the living prophet, president of the church, and with the quorum of the first presidency? Understanding this most important principle, close this year out by looking to our latest living prophet's words. They are found in the Liahona and are the Christmas message of 2025, reprinted because the article is so phenomenal. And I hope and pray that you would take my encouragement to either read, study, or listen to this message by President Dallin H. Oaks as our final lesson in the Doctrine and Covenants. I am grateful for your support, and most important, hope you'll join me again as we open up the Old Testament, the very foundational book that helps us understand all other testaments. I witness to you of the living Christ and of his prophets. They cannot be separated. It is utterly and completely impossible to believe in Jesus Christ without also believing and accepting his divine commission of the prophet, seer, and revelator of our day and our mouthpiece to that which is coming. I hope you'll join me again. Till then.